So today I want to combine the third and fourth rules that I have to become a multimillionaire, or at least how I became a multimillionaire. The third rule being saving, a decent amount of money. The fourth rule being living below your means. So as you could probably guess, these two have a lot to do with each other. If you don't live below your means, you're going to have a hard time saving. And without saving, you're going to have a hard time, becoming a millionaire. And what I learned really early on as a kid is that the more money you have, the more money you're going to make. And it mainly having to do with a compound. So obviously, if I save up $10,000, as compared to someone who has $1,000, I got 10 times more money in them at that point. Let's say if I can make an investment, making 10% a year. On my $10,000, I'm going to be making $1,000. On their $1,000, they're going to be making $100. So living below your means, and I just use some of my examples that I did in my life. And I was pretty extreme. Pretty extreme was, believe it or not, when I was younger, I used to reuse coffee filters. You buy a bag of coffee filters, may cost you $400. Like I said, this is an extreme example, but this is how it was. It may cost you let's say it costs you $4 for, 100 coffee filters. That means you're paying about 4 cents per coffee filter. And in my mind, I said, well, if I can use a coffee filter twice, I'm taking my price per coffee filter from 4 cents to 2 cents. And I believe you're either thinking about saving or you're not thinking about saving. And like I said, that's an extreme example. But that's a real true example. I was doubling my coffee filters, meaning that I was paying half for my coffee filters. And I use that in other ways in my life. I'm sure you know about this story. When I was in the military, my wife was a PFC. I was a PFC. We had just had our oldest son. And just across the hall, normally you live in the same area, same buildings as people of your same rank. So across the hall was a soldier, a PFC. He had a wife who didn't work, and they just had their first baby. So it was a really good example. I already knew I wanted to save, but it was getting my wife to save. So we both was PFC, so we had dual income. So we had the same amount of money that he had coming in, which basically meant we had double the amount of money we coming in. So I told my wife, if they got a car, they got a baby, they got an apartment. We got a car, we got a baby, we have an apartment. So I said we need to, excluding daycare, we need to live the same way that they're living over there as a PFC. Because obviously they're making a living doing it. And if they're making a living doing it at the standard that they're living, which to me they were living a good standard, we can make that same living. And back then I think a PFC might have made $1,100 a month. So he was bringing in $1,100 a month. And at the time we was in Germany. So you got cola, let's say $1,500 a month. So he's getting $1,500 a month. We was bringing in about $3,000 a month. And so let's say if we were paying $400 a month in daycare. So if we lived off my one paycheck the same way that soldier was living off his one paycheck, then we were able to save $1,100 a month, which means we could hurry up and get to that $10,000. Let me see some other examples that I use to save money. Well, I know when I was about 26, I lived in Cleveland. I bought my wife a new car. She was riding around at this time we might have had 2 kids. Well, we had 1 kid, then we had 2 kids. I rode around in a old beat up Chevy Corsica, and my wife, and she had a Jeep Cherokee at the time. I didn't want 2 car payments. I was comfortable riding around. And a funny story, I was in Cleveland. I was riding down the freeway, and for some reason, I used to always have trouble. With my hood. And it was a blizzard one day. And for some reason, I'm driving down the freeway and my hood flew up, hit my windshield. So I pulled over to the side of the road. And so my hood was all dented up. And I was like, man, but then I closed my hood. And for the first time that I had this Corsica, my hood shut real easy because of the dents in it. Must have bent it somehow. So I probably drove around for 2 years with the dented hood. And I always reminded myself, I told my wife, I even tell my kids, how can you ride around in a car like that? I tell them I'm riding in the inside. I'm not on the outside. I can't see it. So it don't really matter when I'm driving down the street. I'm looking at what I'm looking at in the inside, and people may be looking at what I'm looking at on the outside. But at that time, I really, it really don't matter what people are saying. I'm comfortable with what I'm driving. Those are just some examples that I use to save money by living below my means. Even today, with the amount of capital we have, with the amount of income we have, we probably could be living in $1 million house. We choose not to live in the $1 million house because we don't want to make $1 million house payment. We don't want to be a slave to a house payment. I don't want to pay $4,000 or $5,000 a month for just my housing alone when I can pay, $1,400 a month for a $250,000 house. This was when interest rates were very low, and live comfortable, live in a safe environment, and while still pocketing maybe $3,000, really by not living in a house that's probably way too big. We only have one son at home now. That's probably way too big than what we need. Maintaining it and taking care of it is a lot. Me going out there cutting a big, huge lawn is a lot. And it's just not worth it. And more than likely, we're going to downsize even more. So we can do different things with that $3,000. We can invest it. We can go on vacation. We can do other things with that money other than just in a house. And in truth, in my opinion, if you're living in a house that's way too big for what you need, you're really just, to me, you're just showing off, or you got some type of form of static anxiety and you want society to see where you at. So, especially early on, the more money you can save, if the more money you can save as you're younger, you can invest that capital, get that capital growing for you, and then when you're older, that capital is, if you got $1,000 when you're 20, you save it, you invest that $1,000. It's easy for that $1,000 to be $2,000 when you're 40, and then now you're earning so much money, and you're not restarting early on. So it's very, very important to start saving to make money, and if you live below your means, which will really give you the opportunity to start saving, as much money as you can, because when you're on your path to become a millionaire, and then once you become a millionaire, let's say you're buying those bonds at you're putting $100,000 in bonds. 10% you can't get, but just say to keep the same percentage, you're now getting $10,000 a year off that $100,000. So that shows you the compounding and how much more money you can make, just mainly by saving by living below your means.